Little Lady by John Martin. When death lurks, the banshee keens. Mr. Mulcahy cursed, facing the miserly task of going down twisting alleys behind his dilapidated tenements and collecting rents. Around him, the cold night air howled, and there was a suspicion of snow. He glanced fearfully from side to side as he picked his way over trash heaps and around puddles. Dangers might lurk here, he knew. Any kind of dangers, even the unreal kind that folks had spoken of in the old country. It wasn't a healthy place to be in, and Mr. Mulcahy thanked whatever gods he had that he didn't live as poorly as his tenants. His face lit up with a momentary flash of remembrance of his fine Park Avenue apartment and its comforts. Then he scowled as he thought of Dorgan, his agent. It was Dorgan who usually made the collections, but Dorgan was ill, and Mr. Mulcahy had to make the rounds himself. In his pocket he felt the wad of currency he had already collected. The O'Flynns had paid, and the Mulligans too, and Jim Riordan and the family over him. That left only the O'Giverns. Again he scowled. Dorgan had reported the O'Giverns as an uppity crowd, always poor yet proud and clannish. They talked incessantly of their ancient ancestry, but seldom had an extra penny to clink against another. And every once in a while, they let the rent slide. Mr. Mulcahy entered the door of the last tenement and shuddered, thinking of that awful climb to the 5th floor on which the O'Giverns lived. His heart wasn't good, and he hesitated before risking the first step. He'd had an attack once before, and it had terrified him. In fact, as he remembered, it was the sheer fear of death that had made it worse. He knew that, and he also knew that what he'd thought about in those few minutes in which he'd almost died were the comforts he'd be leaving for the cold dankness of the grave. On the 3rd floor, Mr. Mulcahy paused. His heart was pounding badly. Again, he considered giving up the task. But the thought of the O'Giverns letting the rent slide again stiffened his resolution. He was determined to have it out with them, with the old matriarch who ruled the clan, for the father was long dead. He'd take no more of their plaints of poverty. If they couldn't pay out, they'd go. At the 5th landing, he could scarcely draw breath. But then his heart eased, and he advanced to the cracked door and knocked. It opened slowly, and a little girl looked out. "Oh," she began. "You're Mr. Mulcahy." Mulcahy scowled at the presumption. How could the child have known him, he thought as he brushed past her. He had never set foot within the tenement before this moment. The darkness of the room made him pause. His eyes swung slowly to the circle of family faces, then to the wan figure on the bed. His eyes blinked at the tapers burning fitfully at its head and foot. "I've come for the rent," he said uneasily. 4 pairs of eyes, big as owls, fixed on him. The little girl who had opened the door, he noticed she was the oldest of the family of 5 daughters, came quietly around and stared at him. "Our mother is dead, Mr. Mulcahy," she said simply. Mulcahy glanced at the sheet-covered figure, then back at the little girl. About 14, he'd say, but not big as her age, pinched of visage, almost gaunt as were the others. "I've come for the rent," he repeated. "I've no wish to intrude on your sorrows." The girl shook her head. "We've money only for the funeral," she said. "Surely you can wait until next month." The chill air within the dingy rooms was cold as a marble monument. Mulcahy shivered. "The dead pay no rent," he said, trying to stare her down but oddly failing, for her eyes glowed. "You'll be wanting to live here, won't you? You can't live in a tomb." A ghostly smile lit up the girl's face. "True," she said, "but the dead must be paid respect. You won't deny." "I deny nothing," he said testily, and attended a hand. The girl's face stiffened, her lower lip curled. "The neighbors said you were a hard man, Mr. Mulcahy," she said, her voice ringing like brass. "But until now I had never realized you were quite so heartless." "You're an uppity lot," he grumbled. "Especially you, a chit of a girl, to be talking that way." "I am the oldest now of an ancient family," the girl said and waved a hand at the wan circle of pale faces. Her face was proud. "I and my sisters, we come of the blood of kings and things older than Ireland." She glanced at the dead figure of her mother, and Mulcahy's eyes swung to the corpse with hers. "The city will bury her," Mulcahy said. "Why waste your money on a funeral?" His eyes grew bleak and his mouth hard, and he extended his hand again. "The rent manded," he demanded. Before him the 4 children parted to allow the girl to pass. She went to the kitchen cupboard, took out a jar and from it some money. She handed it to him. "It is fitting that a family bury its own dead, Mr. Mulcahy," she said, "but we will take your advice and have the city bury our mother." He fumbled in his pocket. "I'll give you a receipt," he began, but paused as the girl raised a hand, shaking her head. "There will be no need," she said. "You will be dead soon, Mr. Mulcahy. From the dead we need nothing." Angrily, Mulcahy whirled, slammed the door behind him. Then he stopped, his blood freezing as shrill wails burst from the rooms behind him. Like tigers, he thought, or vicious cats bewailing death. Mulcahy's face twisted in scorn. So had it been, as he knew in the old country when an elder died. The mourning was unseemly, almost savage. He shuddered virtuously. Behind him the shrills rose, spiraling to some dizzying, disappearing height, then stopped abruptly, like the cry of a night beast, its throat cut by a swift knife. Dead he'd be, Mr. Mulcahy chuckled to himself, as he put the O'Givern rent money in his fat wallet and started down the steps. It was not for them to talk of death with its dank presence in their own home. It was for them to worry about. Not him. A sudden thought made him pause as he reached the fourth landing. The girl had spoken of his death. But why? What could she know of him? And how could she have known his name? Again, an uneasy feeling ran through Mr. Mulcahy, like a snake. He shook his head impatiently. Already his heart was pounding with the exertion of descending the stairs. Then, the stab of pain hit him with shuddering force, toppling him down the whole third flight. At the bottom, he lay bruised and battered and weak. He tried to call out, but failed. Trembling, he felt for his pulse. It fluttered like the beat of a sick bird's wings. Abruptly, Mr. Mulcahy realized he was dying. Dying alone and unattended, with no one to help him. His strength was leaving him. He hadn't the power to call out. Suddenly, he heard the footsteps on the stairs. He glanced up. It was the O'Givern girl. She pulled her shawl about her as she came down the steps and stopped, watching him. Her eyes were grave, cold as the heights of Connemara, he thought, calm as the swans on the Liffey as it carried them through Dublin, which he had seen as a boy. "Help me," he managed to whisper. "It is not in me to help, Mr. Mulcahy," she said, and her voice was thin as a mountain wind, yet vibrant with power. "That is not my business. My business is to warn." To warn?" he asked, trying to rise, but falling back. "I am an O'Givern," she said. "Like my dead mother before me, I am a banshee, a harbinger of death, as all good folk in the old country believe. 'Tis not the old country here," she continued, "but even here in America we live among our people, wailing to them when death approaches so they can make their peace with God." She paused, and her lips were grim. "Told you I came of the blood of kings and owe things older than Ireland." "But your keening, your wailing," he gasped. "It was for your mother." "It was for you, Mr. Mulcahy," she said softly, and yet with an edge to her voice. "We are things of the spirit and recognize the taint of death on your own. But you will not have time to make your peace with God. Even now you are dying." His hands clutched for her, but she slipped away lightly, like a wraith, and as the darkness closed in upon him, he heard her say, "The dead must be buried, Mr. Mulcahy, and my mother waits for the city to come and take her to rest. Was that not the advice a dead man gave us?" The end. The preceding thrilling story has presented for your enjoyment. This classic work is now in the public domain, making it freely available to be shared and appreciated by all. Some elements may appear outdated or insensitive by today's standards, but we present this work in its original form to preserve its historical context and literary significance. Sit back, relax, and indulge in this timeless tale. Please like, comment, subscribe, and share. Every bit helps this channel grow. Thank you.